great to be with you tonight, even if it is not out in the open, fresh air. I do love some good fresh air, but hey, this will do. It's so great to be with you. You know, I noticed, it's funny, on the slide, I think Noondays was spelled Nude Nays, which sounds like a completely different event, so it is called Noondays, just so you know, yeah. So anyways, I want to thank Jacob Griffin for being here tonight. He's a good friend. Leading us in worship. Yeah, I've known Jacob a long time. I knew Jacob back when I was in y'all's shoes. I was a student here a while ago, and I think I was a junior, and Jacob was a freshman when we met. He was a resident at A-Hall. Anyway, but known Jacob a long time. Glad he's here. Hey, so I've got a question for you. Have you ever been in a situation where there were two different voices that were telling you what to do? Like there were two different voices in your head, and you're like, there's two different things that I'm feeling right now. I don't know which one to do. And the question is, like, how did you determine which one of those to follow? So have you ever seen Emperor's New Groove? Yeah? So, okay, just a little bit about me. I think this is the one movie that I think I can quote, like, beginning to end. So if you haven't seen Emperor's New Groove, don't go watch it. Just come ask me, and I'll quote it to you. This is Kronk, and he has a couple of scenes with like his bad angel and his good angel, and they're hilarious. But this kind of gets at situations that we find ourselves in, right? We find ourselves in a situation like Kronk, where he didn't know what to do. Like, does he kill Cusco? Does he not? Does he kill the talking llama? I don't know. Just watch the movie. But yes, we find ourselves in these situations, and there's a really important question to ask: is what motivates us in that time? Maybe more specifically, is whose approval do we seek? That's a great just kind of diagnostic question. And the Bible really gives us two options to that answer. The first one is the fear of man, and then there's the fear of God. So it's either the fear of man or the fear of God that can drive our decisions, that can motivate us. And I firmly believe that dichotomy, that contrast of choices, it really lies at the foundation of what it means to be a faithful follower of Jesus. If we can properly and accurately understand what is the fear of man, what is the fear of God, how can I walk in the fear of God? Oh, that is just so foundational for the follower of Jesus. So that's what we're going to dig into tonight. And so we'll get to the fear of man in a second, but if there's one big idea that I want you to take away tonight, it's this. It's that true fulfillment is found in the fear of God. True fulfillment is found in the fear of God. And so let's define what we mean by fear, first of all. When we say fear of God, what are we talking about? Well, there's being scared, or as Webster's dictionary puts it, an unpleasant, often strong emotion caused by anticipation or awareness of danger, right? That's probably the most common way we use the word fear. That's not exactly what's going on here. But also in the Webster's dictionary, I think it's about three definitions down. It says a profound reverence and awe, especially toward God. Profound reverence and awe, especially toward God. And I want to add something a little bit to that definition, because this is very close to what we're talking about tonight. Profound reverence and awe toward God that leads to Him guiding your decisions. Remember, we talked about sometimes there's two voices, and so how do we follow the fear of God? How do we let that influence our decisions? A guy named Martin Luther lived a long time ago in the 1500s, theologian. He talked about these two different kinds of fear. He talked about a servile fear and a filial fear. Servile fear it's the fear of physical harm. So that's probably a more common one for us. So that's kind of like the fear from like an inmate to a guard, right? That's more like a servile fear. And there's a filial fear. That's an intense desire not to disappoint a source of security and love. So it's an intense desire not to disappoint a source of security and love. And so this is often what we see maybe in a child to a parent, is this filial fear. So I have three kids. The oldest one, his name is Jason. Jason is 4 years old, and I have actually two daughters as well after him. Sadie, she is, I guess she just turned 3. She just had a unicorn party a couple weeks ago. So there's Jason, and then Adeline is our youngest. And so, my oldest son, Jason, he's 4 years old, and in his 4 years on earth, he's been convinced that I love him. Somehow I've managed that. So I feel pretty good as a parent at this point. I've convinced him of that. And I think it's mostly because of what I have done for him. He understands that. He understands I help provide him food. I hug him a lot. I wrestle with him. I take him and turn him upside down and shake him to try to get his lunch money, just to prepare him for any potential bullying down the road. I don't know. I feel like that's my role. But so therefore, he has this desire to not disappoint me. So that's this filial fear, and that's very wrapped up in what is the fear of God. It's a desire not to disappoint, a source of security, a source of love. And so this fear of God, walking in this fear of God, that's our struggle. That's the struggle bus for the follower of Jesus. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, well, this is just important to understand, because this lies at the heart of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And so tonight I want to make the case that true fulfillment is found in the fear of God. Now, there are many places we could look in Scripture to investigate this. This is a theme that we see from beginning to end in Scripture. We're going to look one place tonight, and there's one guy, his name is Solomon. And that's what we're going to look at. So who is Solomon? Well, first of all, Solomon is he's the son of King David. So King David is he's the second king of Israel, great king of Israel, man after God's own heart. So David and Bathsheba, he's the son of King David and Bathsheba, which that is a crazy story for another time. Solomon, he also inherited the throne after his father David, and that is also a crazy story for another time. Solomon was super wise. There was one time where he judged this case where there was two women who said that the same baby was their baby, and they couldn't tell which one was which, and so he judged that. And that is, you guessed it, a crazy story for another time. But Solomon had a lot going on in his life, but we find him in this context. We find him as king of Israel. He's taken the throne. He's ascended the throne. He's very early in his time as king. And then he falls asleep, right? It's nighttime, completely natural. But this isn't just a regular sleep. He has a dream. So Solomon has a dream. And in this dream, the Lord tells him, the Lord comes to him in this dream and says that he can ask for anything. He says, you can have anything that you want. What can I give you? And what does Solomon ask for? Well, in 1 Kings 3, verses 12 through 14, we see the Lord's response. Because when the Lord asked Solomon, what do you want? Solomon asked for wisdom. He said, I'm a young king. I don't know exactly what I'm doing here. Please give me wisdom. And so in 1 Kings 3, 12 through 14, the Lord said, I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands, as David your father did, I will give you a long life. Pretty cool encounter. God says, I'll give you whatever you want. Solomon says, give me wisdom. I need to be wise to rule these people. And God says, you got it, and you've got more. And so just in the next chapter, in 1 Kings 4, verses 29 through 31, we see, okay, Solomon is gaining wisdom. So 1 Kings 4:29 says, God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the peoples of the East and greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than anyone else, including Ethan the Ezrahite, wiser than Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol, and his fame spread to all the surrounding nations. Boy, I don't know if you know who Heman, Calcol, and Darda are, but if you're wiser than them, apparently you're good stuff. So Solomon, he gained wisdom, right? So we see that he is gaining in this, in his notoriety. He is gaining in his fame among all the peoples. So Solomon has this dream. He asked for wisdom. Okay, we start to see he's gaining wisdom. And now we see that he's gaining wealth as well. So it's a few chapters later in 1 Kings 10, verses 23 through 25, we see this description of the wealth of Solomon. Boy, check this out. King Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth. The whole world sought audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom God had put in his heart. Year after year, everyone who came brought a gift, articles of silver and gold, robes, weapons, and spices, and horses and mules. So, Solomon is gaining in wealth. He's gaining in this fame. He's gaining this reputation among the people of the earth. Solomon was rich. He was so rich. Who knows the richest person in the world? Somebody throw out a guess. Jeff Bezos. That's a great guess. Jeff Bezos is indeed the richest person in the world with a net worth of $131 billion. Also, that's Jeff Bezos in the 90s on the left, and that's Jeff Bezos $131 billion later on the right. Apparently, it turns you into Bruce Willis. The contrast has nothing to do with what we're talking about tonight. I just thought it was funny. So that's 90s Jeff Bezos, 2000s Jeff Bezos. So he's $131 billion. Next is Bill Gates. 96.5 billion, so he's pretty far back, actually. He's a cool 35 million back. Bill Gates, former CEO of Microsoft, now doing charity work. The third one is Warren Buffett, he's at $82.5 billion. So these are the three richest guys in the world. Now, probably most of us have heard of all three of these guys. Comparatively, Solomon is right up with these guys, except really he's like all three of them put together. In his time, we just cannot really fathom how much wealth that Solomon had. He was so rich that he really made all the other kings of the world look bad. He made them all look bad. Now, I know how this feels. So when I was a freshman, when I was in a lot of y'all's seat, I was a freshman, there was a guy at the BSM. I think he was a senior at the time. We only overlapped like 1 year. But he was going on a date with this girl. And he wanted to go on a date with this girl. But this girl went on a mission trip to New York City. So what does he do? Does he wait for her to come back and go on a date with her? No. He flies to New York City, brings like nice clothes for her and everything, surprises her, takes her on like a Broadway play, I think. So they did the first date in New York City. There was a complete and total surprise. And me and the other guys at the BSM were like, come on, man. You're making us look bad. How do we even is that what the girls are going to expect now? So this is kind of what Solomon is doing to the rest of the kings of the world. He's just making them look bad. So he has this dream, right? So he gains wisdom, he gains wealth, he's starting to gain this reputation. He gains wealth, wisdom, he also gains something else. He gains wives. Okay. This really took a turn, didn't it? Hear me out. So this is 1 Kings 11:1. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter. Pharaoh's daughter was his first wife, but then all of a sudden he starts collecting all these other wives. So you can tell the narrator, he really kind of takes a turn. This is a good example of the Bible being descriptive, not prescriptive. Does that make sense? So descriptive is just describing something that happened. It's not saying this is the good thing, because we'll see. We'll see how this turns out for us. So 1 Kings 11, verses 3 and 4, he had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. Do you hear that? His wives led him astray. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. Okay, so here's this picture. He's this picture of Solomon. He has everything that anybody could ever want. And how's it going for him? Well, lucky for us, we can actually see how that went for him, because we have a peek into the life of Solomon. We have a peek into his mind. The Book of Ecclesiastes. The Book of Ecclesiastes tells us, okay, how was it really going with Solomon as he is accumulating all of these things? And so this is where we see Paul is accumulating all these things, and then the Book of Ecclesiastes comes up. And the author of Ecclesiastes is really never named. He's not named. We don't know exactly who wrote it, but traditionally it's been attributed to Solomon, and a lot of evidence points to it. Yes, this is Solomon who is writing these words. Now, the Book of Ecclesiastes is a journey. It's a journey, and more than that, it's more of a journal of sorts. Anybody journal in here? Anybody do that anymore? Yeah, it's a good practice to do. This is like a journal. So Solomon was filling out and writing about his experience and how he was feeling about his life. It's a journal of one guy's attempt at finding fulfillment. And he's trying to find fulfillment in the things that God has blessed him with, instead of finding fulfillment in God. Do you catch that? That is a key twist there. Instead of finding fulfillment in God himself, he's trying to find fulfillment in the things that God has given him. So instead of looking to the giver of all things, he is looking to the things that God has given him. And that is lethal. And so the book of Ecclesiastes, it's fascinating, it's sad, it's also redemptive, as we're going to see. All those things at once. And so it opens in chapter 1 with this cold dose of reality. So the writer in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 16 and 17, he says, I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly, but I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. So already in verse 1, he's realizing, these heights that I've risen to are not fulfilling. These heights that I've risen to are like a chasing after the wind. So wisdom alone didn't fulfill him. He became the wisest king Israel had ever seen or ever saw after him, and it wasn't enough. Okay, well, maybe the buildings that he built, maybe the possessions that he acquired, maybe that gave him fulfillment. Well, Let's take a peek into his mind in Ecclesiastes 2, verses 4 through 11. It says, I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Man, what's going on here? By any worldly standard, this guy's killing it. He's got everything you could possibly want. He's accumulated things. He knows things that nobody else knows. Kings and queens are coming to him to learn from him. And yet we see, we're reading his journal, he says, it's like a chasing after the wind. It's meaningless. I don't feel like I've gained anything. You know, some of the world's greatest philosophers, they lived in the 60s AD, 1960s that is. The Rolling Stones, have you all heard of them? So the Rolling Stones, they released their song in 1965, Can't Get No Satisfaction. The lyrics, tell me if they sound familiar. When I'm driving in my car and the man comes on the radio, he's telling me more and more about some useless information supposed to fire my imagination. I can't get no, oh, no, no, no. Hey, hey, hey. That's what I say. I can't get no satisfaction. I can't get no satisfaction because I try and I try and I try and I try. I can't get no. I can't get no. Does that sound familiar to what Solomon, maybe a little more poetic or less poetic? I don't know. It might rhyme a little bit more, but I feel like Solomon said it a little bit better. But yeah, so the Rolling Stones, they got it in the 60s. They felt this fruitless pursuit of worldly pleasures. They were knee deep in it. They were neck deep in it, and they were feeling, I'm not feeling this satisfaction, this fulfillment that I was promised, that I thought that I would achieve. So what we're seeing here is the logical conclusion of a life that is driven by the fear of man. It is driven by a desire to accumulate and to impress. And so let's talk about a little bit, what is the fear of man? Fear of man can be defined by a desire to gain the approval of people. A desire to gain the approval of people. We see this in Solomon. There's a desire to learn, to build, to acquire in order to impress, in order to show how great he is. We see that in his life. And in Proverbs 29:25 talks about the fear of man. It says, fear of man will prove to be a snare. And though a snare is like a trap, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. Now, I would add that to the fear of man, not only is he engaging in that, there's also a good dose of hedonism in there, which is simply just the pursuit of pleasure in this world. The fear of man is wrapped up in accomplishments. It's wrapped up in grades, job, house, stuff. Solomon looked to accomplishments and possessions for fulfillment. We see that in the book of Ecclesiastes. The fear of man is wrapped up in relationships. Marriage, family, friends. It looks to those things for fulfillment. And that's what Solomon tried to look to. He tried to look to relationships for fulfillment. It's wrapped up in reputation. The fear of man asks, how will this affect my reputation? The fear of God asks, how will this affect God's reputation? You see the difference there? Self is left out of it. Self is put to the side and God is exalted. When we can distinguish between fear of man and fear of God. Humility is present in someone who has the fear of God. So the best definition of humility I think I've ever heard is humility is not thinking less of yourself, but it's thinking of yourself less. Have you heard that before? It's not just putting yourself down, but it's really just not even thinking of yourself at all and having a focus that is on other people. So Solomon, he looked to reputation for fulfillment. And throughout this book of Ecclesiastes, we get a picture of what a life driven by the fear of man looks like. The fear of man, it's a trap. and it's a trap that leads to emptiness. It leads to an empty life, because there are promises that this world gives us, and yet when we follow those paths, we find that they are empty. They don't have any substance to them. So we see this in the book of Ecclesiastes. We see Solomon go through this thought process, and he says, I did this, and I gained this, and people came to me, and they asked me questions because they didn't know, and I was able to talk to them, and I gained wisdom, and I gained all these things, but in the end, it was emptiness. And so we see him go all through 11 chapters of this, and even most of the 12th chapter. At the very end, though, the very end of the book of Ecclesiastes, we see the conclusion. We see the conclusion of this entire book that has just gone on this philosophical, meandering journey. And Ecclesiastes 12, verse 13 says this, Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. Fear God, keep his commandments. This is the duty of all mankind. That's powerful. We've heard about what Solomon did. We've heard what Solomon had. We heard about what he pursued. And then the conclusion is this. He says, I've done all these things. I've gained all these things. And yet this is the duty of all of mankind. Because this is a seasoned Solomon talking. This is not young Solomon, kind of in the prime of his kingdom, the prime of his kingship. This is a Solomon who's been down every road that humanity can offer. And as he's gotten to the end of every road, he's found nothing but dead ends. He was looking to the pursuits of this world, and he was looking to them to provide something that they never could serve. Have you ever looked to something to serve a role that it can't serve? Have you ever looked to something to perform a function that there's just no way it can perform? And maybe you didn't know it in the moment. I do this every April when baseball season comes around, and I say, all right, Texas Rangers are going to the World Series. I was a student in 2010 and 2011 when they went to the World Series twice. In 2010, they got within one strike twice of winning the World Series. I got on the front page of the Shorthorn cheering on the Rangers at a watch party right downstairs in this building in 2010. And yet there's just nothing but heartache, nothing but emptiness down that road. So we know how this feels. So our culture does this all the time. Our culture all the time will chase a road, and it only leads to emptiness. We do this. So, okay, do y'all remember a tragedy that happened in this nation in March of this year? There was catastrophe that happened. It was worldwide in March of this year, because there was a several-hour period where not just Facebook, but Instagram and WhatsApp all crashed. Do y'all remember this? It's seared into some people's minds. March 2019, all three of those sites went down for several hours. And of course, mass hysteria ensued and panic and all those things. But here's something that was sobering and really fascinating, because when that happened, there's a top pornography site that reported they saw an 11% spike in their traffic. And then shortly after, it peaked at 19% spike in activity on their site. You can see the graph, and you can see the timeline, and it's literally as the sites crash, it spikes, and then as the sites come back on, it goes back down. We look for something to distract. We look for something to self-medicate because there's a brokenness inside of us that we don't know how to fix. But too often, the thing that we look to has absolutely no ability to perform the function that we are expecting of it. It has no capacity to fulfill it whatsoever. And so we find emptiness time after time after time. Back in 2008, this is 11 years ago at this point, I went on a backpacking trip to Colorado. This is my first backpacking trip, so it's not just camping, it's backpacking where you put everything on your pack, right? And then you hike, and then you camp, and you hike some more, and you camp, and hike some more. It's a blast. This is in Colorado. This is, we started off at about 8,000 feet above sea level. Our plan was to go to about 12,000 feet. So that's me. That's 18-year-old Ben, with 2008 megapixels. This is our group in 2008. So the plan was we were going to hike, and we are going to climb the Continental Divide. You know what that is? It's where, the rivers go one way and then one way on the other side. So it was a cool thing to see. We hiked over it. That was 12,000 feet above sea level. And the plan was to hike for 28 miles, camp, and then climb 3 different mountains. I was stoked about it, man. I had no clue how hard it was going to be. That was the hardest physical thing I've done in my life. But something happened. It was I think it was the second day. We had gone about 10 miles the first day. We were several miles into our hike on the second day. And I was not in charge of this. It was somebody else in the group was in charge of the navigation. He'd done this before. But in the middle of the second day, we realized we were way off from where we were supposed to be. We did some calculations, and we realized we were about 20 miles from where we were supposed to be. And we looked around, and we're just kind of in the middle of the mountains in Colorado. And we realized this is not where we're supposed to be. It was fun. We got out safely. It was okay. But it was a disappointment. I had all these expectations, and yet it did not fulfill, because so many things in this life offer fulfillment, but then deceive us and only give us emptiness. What is that thing for you? What is that thing in your life that is offering fulfillment, but only delivering emptiness? It changes often in our lives. It can be one thing at one point in our life and then change to another thing. Sometimes it's the same thing that's just offering it and pulling it away. Is it a career? Ultimate career. Solomon, he had this career. He was a king, but it didn't do it for him. What about a good paying job? Man, when Solomon was king, silver was treated like it was stone because there was so much of it in the kingdom. That didn't do it for him. Is it sex? Solomon had all he wanted, didn't do anything for him. It did not fulfill him. Is it affirmation from people? Is it fear of man? Solomon found out that was as empty as the wind. It was as empty as chasing after the wind. So now hear this. All of these things, sex, affirmation from people, a career, a good paying job, these things are not bad in and of themselves. Please don't hear that tonight. Those things, they have an immense capacity to be enjoyed when they are in the proper place in our lives. It's when they consume our thoughts, that's when they betray us. It's when we look to them for comfort, that's when they betray us. It's when they guide our decisions. That is when they betray us. So again, heed the words of Ecclesiastes 12:13. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God, keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. So when we properly align our priorities, when we have them in their proper order, then we can fully enjoy the things of this life to their full potential. But when we look to the things of this life to do what only a relationship with Jesus can do, then we end up failing. If that thing that you're looking to for fulfillment, if that's a person, if that's a husband, a wife, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a best friend, any friend, family member, then we're not being fair to that person. Does that make sense? Because then we are looking to them to perform a function that they were not created to perform, and they will never be able to perform. This is crucial to understand. So for example, when I leave tonight and I get in my car, I'm going to direct my voice toward the dashboard of my car. I'm going to say, hey, Alexa, send a text to Shauna, my wife. I'm headed home, smiley face. Send, right? And so what's going to happen? Nothing. My car can't do that. I drive a 2009 Honda CR-V. That's 10 years old. It has no clue what I'm talking about. But do you see how insane that would be? If you're sitting in the passenger seat and I do that, you'd be like, you're insane. I think that's how God sometimes looks at us when we try to find fulfillment, and when we expect something that's of this earth, and we expect something from it that it can never do, it was never created to perform. So it's only when a fear of God defines us that we begin to enjoy life to its full potential. It's only when our lives are defined by what would God want me to do in this situation. It's only then that we can enjoy life and really find the fulfillment that God has designed and put on this earth for us. Because if King Solomon, if he followed all of life's pursuits to their end, and he ultimately said, fear God and keep his commandments, that's all there is. If he did that, then we don't have to. I'm going to go out on a limb and say none of us are ever going to achieve the wealth, the wisdom heights that Solomon did. So we can look to his example, and he left a journal for us to say, hey, no, it's not worth it. We can look at his example and learn from it. So the fear of God, that is what leads us to fulfillment. Now the fear of God, that is a fountain that leads to life. If the fear of man is a trap that leads to emptiness, the fear of God is a fountain that leads to life. You know, as we talked about at the beginning, fear of God is a profound reverence and awe toward God that leads to him guiding our decisions. And so here's my challenge for you tonight. Allow God to mold you into someone who fears God above all else, no matter the voice that you're getting in your ear. Allow the Spirit of God to do work in you, to mold you into a person who fears God above all else. I heard a story once of a soldier who was standing at attention. They were doing a drill, and they had like spectators looking on at this drill. Where's Bybeth? You in the room? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. ROTC stuff, yeah. The soldier was standing at attention, and all of a sudden he waves at the crowd that's watching, and his drill sergeant is ticked, and his drill sergeant runs over and says, "Cut it out." And so the next time the company comes around, the same guy just waves at the spectators, and his drill sergeant is just furious. And so the soldiers go back to the barracks, and the drill sergeant barges in, and he says, "How dare you? Do you know what I can do to you?" And the private, he said, "Well, yes, sir, but you don't know my mother." The private was only worried about what his mom was thinking of him, right? He had this filial fear with his mother. Having the fear of God means being able to face a world that's going to get in our face, and they're going to say, "You're crazy. You're crazy for giving your time and your energy to someone who can't pay you back. You're crazy for being bold in conversations and talking about Jesus with your friends. That's crazy. You're crazy for spending Christmas holiday in a different country talking to people about Jesus." Who in this room is doing that this year? Who's going to spend their Christmas? Yeah, there's a few people in here who are going to spend their Christmas holiday talking to people about Jesus. That's crazy. That's what the world's going to tell us. And the world's going to say, just like the drill sergeant, "Don't you know what we can do to you? Don't you know the power we hold over you?" And we're going to reply, just like the private, "Yes, but you don't know my Father. He's created us to be an eternal being. He's created all of us as eternal beings. This life is too short to worry about what people would think about us." Corrie ten Boom, which if you don't know who Corrie ten Boom is, please go look up her life. She lived in the mid-1900s. She and her family saved many Jews from the Nazis in World War II. She said, "If you look to the world, you'll be distressed. If you look within, you'll be depressed. But if you look at Christ, you'll be at rest." So what does it look like to fear God? How do we do this? How do we develop this fear of God? I think there's really three main things that we can do to fear God. And one of them is trust God. The second one is know God's word. And the third one is be with God's people. You know, the last time that I spoke at Vertical, this was in April of this past spring semester. I think it was April 12th, I think. I told everyone that my wife was expecting our fourth child at the time. And it turned out that child didn't make it to the second trimester. We had a miscarriage about a month later. And I haven't talked about this publicly since then. A lot of people in our life know. But that was that's a very difficult time. And my wife and I, we had conversations, and we still have conversations periodically about, like, why can we get through this? Why are we okay on the other side of this? It's some of the deepest grief that someone can go through. But we realized we felt there can be grief and there can be peace at the same time. And we had that. We thought, why is that? And it's a longer answer, but a big reason is because we decided beforehand, before this happened, years ago, we decided that our fulfillment, our source of satisfaction was not going to be each other. Our source of satisfaction wasn't going to be the people that God had put in our life. Source of satisfaction would not be any possessions that God has blessed us with. And boy, he's blessed us a ton with people, with each other, with the things that he's provided for us. Sure, he's provided a lot of that. But that's not our source, because if something can be taken away, then it's not a good source of fulfillment. We decided beforehand we were going to trust God. We decided beforehand that we were going to know God's word. So when Psalm 46 says, be still and know that I am God, I will be exalted in the nations, I will be exalted in the earth. When it says that the Lord is our refuge and strength and ever-present help in trouble, therefore we will not fear that the mountains give way, that the earth falls into the heart of the sea. We can still have peace. And then thirdly, we're with God's people. We press into the community that God had put around us at the time. And for us, that's how the fear of God manifested itself in our lives. It's interesting because today, October 15th, I just learned this about 30 minutes ago. This is the official Infant Loss Remembrance Day. This is the time when we remember that. And so it's a very special day. And so this is a very special time when I can remember this is how the fear of God helped me through one of the most difficult times in my life. And so for you, I hope tonight, that you're convinced that true fulfillment is found in the fear of God. Briefly, as we close, Proverbs 19:23 says, the fear of the Lord leads to life, then one rests content, untouched by trouble. Proverbs 9:10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. Psalm 112:1 says, blessed are those who fear the Lord, who find great delight in his commands. Is that something you want? For the follower of Jesus, I implore you, ask yourself, am I listening to the fear of man? Is that guiding my decisions? Or is it the fear of God that's guiding my daily decisions? And if you're not a follower of Jesus and you want the fear of God, here's how you do that. If you want that to define your life, you say, God, I admit that I am not defined by a fear of God. I am following other things. But I believe that in my brokenness, you have reached out and you provided a way of salvation through Jesus. He has taken on the judgment that hung above me, and he's taken that, and he let the wrath of God crush him. I believe that. And I commit my life to following you. I commit my life to be defined by the fear of God. And that is what it looks like to begin to follow Jesus. And I'm telling you, that grows, and it grows, and you go through life, and you go through hardship, and there's grief in this world. But we have a sweet Savior. So I'm going to call the band up. We're going to close in a song, and this is the words of this song. The words of this song are so true. They ring true, and they go deep down in our souls. So as we sing it, let it be a reminder to each other that Jesus is better. He's better than fill in the blank. So I'm praying for our time in small groups tonight that it would be an impactful time. So let's pray with me as we close. Father, thank you for your word that gives us hope. Thank you for truth. We give you praise. True fulfillment is found in the fear of you and not in the fear of man. So God, we just want to sing together that Jesus is better than anything. So we lift our voices to you in his name.